Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Coptic Cave. I know I said that my last episode for Iran Week would be the interview I conducted with Goldie, but I have a story in my hands that I sincerely believe needs telling. It's the story of Jamshid Sharmahd, and it's tough to get through. I was on the phone with his daughter Gazelle, and it was emotionally devastating. So I can only imagine how emotionally devastating it was for her to live through it. That's who I have with me today. Please do me the honor of introducing yourself a bit and tell us, for people who only knew your father from headlines, who was he really and what was he like, you know, before the day he made his trip?
Thank you, Michael, for having me and for doing all of these shows. This is so important to connect, our communities with each other. You asked me to do the impossible to describe my father in such a short time, but let me introduce myself. I am Jamshid Sharmahd. I am a freedom advocate and the spokesperson of the Kingdom Assembly of Iran, which are freedom fighters inside of Iran, and taking over pretty much my father's path, who has done exactly that for the last 2 decades. So, who is my father? He was born in Iran, raised in Germany, and then chose America as his new adopted home for the last 2 decades. And from here, he was being the voice of the people of Iran. And what I mean with that is not just echoing what they're saying, but an important part of what he did was re educating the people of Iran on their true history, on who they are, on who they're coming from. Why is this so important and so dangerous to the Ayatollahs? Because for the last 47 years, the Ayatollahs have occupied Iran, which means the generations growing up inside of Iran were taught by their enemies what to believe about themselves, where they're coming from, that Iran is Islamic and the Ayatollahs are a government ruling over them. So my father was pretty much doing counter-terrorism and counter-propaganda by telling the people of Iran, these are your mortal enemies that took over your country. They are enemies of Iran. They took over your flags. They took over your language. They took over your faith. They took over your ministries. They took over your everything, and they're taking over your life, and they're killing you every 4 hours now. An Iranian is being lynched. How dangerous is what my father was doing? Well, 2 decades ago, they sent the first assassins to Los Angeles to murder him. And for the last 2 decades, they tried to kidnap him several times. And unfortunately, in 2020, they were able to do that on a flight overlay during the pandemic. As he stranded in Dubai for a couple of days, they snatched him, took him over borders to Oman and then over the sea to Iran, held him hostage for the last 5 years, and killed him last October. So I don't know if I don't want to overload everybody with what is going on because I'm still processing myself what is going on. But that is in a snapshot what my father is, what many of our leaders in this resistance have been doing. There has been teachers and scholars, Michael, before our time, before me and you were born, doing this fight. And thanks to them, we have this new generation that knows who they are. Like the Copts in Egypt know who they are. The Iranian people know who they are. The Jews know who they are and are fighting together against this occupation by the Arab Islamists.
How far was your father's reach with his work? I mean, how many people was he able to connect to? Um, I mean, he was talking about some of the deepest taboos, not just in Iran, but in the Middle East. You know, Islamic colonialism, it doesn't just, finish at Iran. It literally went all over the place, from Iran to Egypt to Morocco. We're talking about, you know, indigenous cultural erasure. Why was the IRGC so dead set against this? He can't possibly be the only person that's doing it. Why was he seen as such a threat?
He was not the only person, and he was actually working with scholars from inside of Iran. So, whenever you're talking to forces inside of Iran, mobilize them, protect them, that is a threat to the Ayatollahs. So, one thing that I left out is my father was a software engineer. So, 20 years ago, before we had, what we're doing right now, Instagram, social media, where you can just create a fake account and start talking with the world. We didn't have that back then. So my father created a portal, a website where people from inside of Iran could log in. He protected their IP addresses so the regime couldn't track them down and come and take them to jail as they're doing right now. You know, when you click on a like button that is related to Israel inside of Iran, the police shows up and takes you somewhere where you're never coming back from. So that protection of the people inside, the taboo breaking, as you talked about, was something that we can't fathom right now because it's normal to us right now. It's normal to us right now to rise against them. That was deadly decades ago. How far was his reach was your question. He had a satellite radio that reached millions inside of Iran and started forming this, but it wasn't without backlash. Because when you're a taboo breaker, the first time you're coming out, people hate you. How can you say that? Da, 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 this and that. But he continued doing that. So we see the aftermath of my father and all of our fathers who've done this together. My father was, again, not the only one. We can see it in this generation now. If you look at your feed right now of what's happening inside of Iran, you see freedom fighters inside of the streets burning Khamenei's picture. It's a whole movement there. You see the Artish, which is the Iranian army, coming to the streets, filming themselves in their uniforms, declaring war on the Ayatollahs. Think 20 years ago, nobody would have had the stones to do that, you know? And they're all out there. So how far is his reach? Global. um, him and other scholars, for example, I'm working right now for the last 2 years with a scholar from Lebanon, originally from Lebanon, Dr. Walid Faris, who did
Wow.
pioneering work on the Copts, on the Egyptian Copts. You
Yeah.
know, like he was one of the first, again in the 1980s, before we were born, to come out and see the Egyptian Copts are indigenous people to Egypt and what they're doing and what they're standing for. So it has been all over the Middle East, pioneers coming out and doing that, that formed our minds. Even me, you know, even when I was a student of my father, I was also a student of American schools, of European schools, and those schools have been infiltrated by our enemies, teaching me, brainwashing me into something else. And then I had the opportunity to challenge my father, who was teaching me, no, this is not true what they're teaching you. So this is a movement that has begun decades ago and is influencing geopolitics and our realities today.
What age did you realize that your father was no ordinary man, that he was doing things that were extraordinary?
On the day that they sent assassins to our door, I think the illusion of like my father's just somebody who was like talking somewhere, doing something, went away when I understood like they're doing international kidnapping and assassination plots not for every single person. And they didn't stop at that. And they wanted us not silent, they wanted us not quieter, they wanted us dead. That meant whatever he was doing, whatever his movement, and the people of Iran that he was echoing there, they were coming on his show and speaking and you know, bringing out the truth. That was a nerve that they were hitting. So when when terrorists plot to come to a different country and take you out, it means you're doing something right. And I have not lived up to that yet, so I'm still like following his footsteps. And maybe one day they they want to assassinate me too. Then I know that I've hit a nerve. But what I've noticed is that our generation is now outspread throughout the years, so they can't come after each and every one of us. So what they're doing is a global campaign to take us all out. So we're being shadow banned on social media. We're being silenced in Western media. We're being brand marked. We're being like targeted as Islamophobes, as this and that, and blah 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 blah. So they're doing that on a broader scale now with what they have with billions and trillions to our army right now. But that was the aha moment back then where I realized, no, this is no joke.
I mean, just on a bit of a personal note, you know, my father, he hosts Bible studies at his house, and often he'll have ex-Muslims come to his Bible studies. And there have been moments where, you know, he's like been nervous about going back to Egypt. But the idea of somebody coming, the idea of Egypt sending like assassins to my father, it's something that I just can't imagine. And here you are with, an assassination attempt, and then further on, I mean, later on in your life, he was literally abducted overseas and kidnapped by a terrorist regime. Um, Knowing who your father was, it's devastating. It makes it even more devastating to just think about the experience that, I mean, what he went through as he was traveling abroad. Can you take us to the moment when he was in the UAE? When did you first realize that something was wrong and that something had happened to your father?
I realized it too late, unfortunately. When my father went to like he was in Los Angeles. He was going on a trip to India and to Germany actually for business and of course also his movement. So that was in the beginning of 2020. Before the pandemic hit and before we had the shutdown. So when he went over there, I was pregnant. I was working as a nurse during the pandemic. So I thought like the worst nightmare is for me to lose my child because I get COVID. I was working in a COVID ICU and doing that kind of stuff. So I wasn't paying much attention to my father stranded over there in the pandemic in India for 4 months and then in Germany, not being able to get a direct flight back and continuing his business there. So I saw later on that he sent me actually a picture from his hotel room in Dubai that I never responded to. And I was, focusing on my own nightmare over here of like people dying left and right. And my mother saw that. And when my mother saw that he was in a hotel room in Dubai, her heart dropped. She was like, oh my God, people get assassinated and kidnapped in Dubai. What are you doing there? So to calm her, he opened up his Google tracker. And he said, you can see me on the maps. You can follow me as I'm going to the hotel. So they were playing a little bit. He was going into the lobby and she was following on the
Hmm.
maps. Yes, I can see you. And that was, in one way, assuring her he's fine. She can always see him. And on the other side, gave him false safety because after that, he didn't respond anymore. And my mom saw that he was moving on the map. So she assumed he got another flight, wasn't able to connect with him, internet or something. But then she saw that the footage, of where he was going, he wasn't going to India. He was going south and he was going over the border to Oman. And she's like, why is this moving? At that point, she got a message from my father's phone saying, I'm fine, I will contact you. And later on, we found out, of course, that was the kidnappers, not him. And the next morning, the whole world wakes up to the picture of my father in the news, blindfolded by the Ayatollahs, forced to confessions about crimes that he did not commit. And we were like, they got him. Your mortal enemies that have sworn to take you have you in their hands, and that you realize that together with the world. So it was way too late for me to you know do anything about it, and we were just like presented with this fact together with the rest of the world and started our fight in 2020 until now. And I want to add something to what you said about your father, something that many people don't know. In these last 5 years, I connected to every opposition leader, movement, freedom fighter, journalist, whoever is out there. And you don't know how many of them, after I talk to them like publicly, they tell me when the camera's off, that would happen to your father could have happened to my father. That almost happened to me. I was almost kidnapped. I have death threats. I'm living in a safe house. So it is much more widespread than we think it is. But people don't want to talk about it out of fear, out of protection, out of like trying to get out of the spotlight of the regime that is trying to take all of us out. So yeah, we have to understand they're everywhere. They're in our countries. They have long infiltrated our governments, our institutions, and they will not stop unless we stop them.
I have to be honest. I've heard about the IRGC doing these things, and not just the IRGC too, other groups too. But I've heard about the IRGC and other groups doing this thing in the USA, in Canada, definitely in Europe, in countries like in Germany and France. But it does stand out to me that it happened in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. For those of you who might not know, there's almost like this informal agreement between these groups that they actually don't operate in Dubai because there's so much financials going on in Dubai. that to take this sort of risk to operate in Dubai means you're like they see you as such an enormous threat that they cannot take any chance. They have to get you right then and there. And so over time, you discover more about what the IRGC is doing to your father, the solitary confinement, the torture, the psychological pressure. They even denied him his Parkinson's medication. I mean, there's so much cruelty, and this is, one of, if not the cruelest regimes in existence. What what details stand out to you the most?
The bravery of my father throughout all of this time. You know, we had the chance that many don't have throughout the 5 years to have minutes with him on the phone. Of course, the terrorists are standing right next to him with a gun to his head, but he was very smart and calm and strong and spoke in code to us. So many of the details that we have is because of the coded language that he used to let us know what's happening. But they were never able to break him, They usually don't kill freedom fighters like that because they know the resistance and everybody will be infuriated and stand up, They right now they have the same dilemma inside of Iran as these colonels of the armies are standing up. They're thinking, if we kill them, the whole army will revolt, If we don't do anything, they will join them. So it was this dilemma of not knowing what they should do with my father. So they pretty much tortured him to death. So you could hear his voice from this strong voice in 2020 to almost vanishing and breaking in 2024, a month before they murdered him. And when we were able to get his body back, which is also, again, a miracle. At the first time in history, we got a body back from the regime. That has never happened before. And it was not our governments that did that. It was the people, our community that brought him back to us. And when we saw what they did to him, Michael, they mutilated his corpse. We saw that he had no teeth anymore. They cut out his tongue. His brain was nowhere to be found anymore. His heart was being cut out. All of his limbs and everything. You could not recognize your own father. And we still had to see him, because when you don't see him, it never becomes real. So that moment when me and my family actually saw him and saw what he endured in these 4 years, I was just so happy that he's no longer in his hands. And I had so much awe for the strength that he brought to us throughout all of these 5 years that I can't put it in words. But what that inspired, and I want to make that very clear in case you have seen footage of his wake that we had in Los Angeles last week, is a fire in the diaspora. Our diaspora was so long divided, like everybody like kicking everybody. But what happened when they did that to my father and the people came together and brought him together is a fire that cannot be extinguished, because each and every one of our members saw themselves in my father and knew this could happen to us. And this is unacceptable what they did. We're bringing him back. We're continuing what they're doing. And as hard as it is to speak about that, I feel liberated, I feel stronger, and I feel that they could not take him out because we have this system of people. They could not take him out because our people made him immortal. Our people made him a legend. And from that legend is growing legends after legends after legends in Iran that will be the downfall of this regime. That, as you said, there is no bigger evil in this world. Has never been.
No, there isn't. I sometimes think about how Egyptians revolted against their government, and I'm not going to pass a judgment on whether I think that was the right choice to make or wrong choice to make at the time. History, it's all said and done. The history is what it is. But um, I thought that the Egyptian government was particularly cruel, and they are very heavy-handed. We have our own secret police and intelligence services, but nothing, and I mean nothing, comes close to the brutality of the IRGC. For so much power to be in the hands of such a small group that's despised by the vast majority of its citizenry. I mean, they have to act in a way that is really unspeakable, unfathomable. It exceeds all imaginable cruelty. One of the cruelest, but since we're on the topic of cruelty, one of the most painful things about hearing about your father's story is how other governments didn't step up. Not the United States and not Germany. They kept sort of, bouncing, responsibility off one another. It just it must have felt like you were so alone, not having a representative government take the initiative and work towards getting him back. What was that like?
Um, One of the taboos that my father broke, and again, he was not the only one, but he did decades ago, when many people were believing in the Obamas of the world, the politicians that said, oh, we're standing for democracy and human rights and blah, 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 and somehow always made the wrong choice. Somehow always had deals with, Islamist jihadists from Afghanistan to, Lebanon. The Muslim Brotherhood is still not on their terrorist list and so on. You're always thinking like, why are they always making the wrong choice? And people were like scratching their heads about that. My father and many of these scholars were saying, they're not making mistakes. They're making profits. And what sounded like a conspiracy theory back then, we have proof now for it. And it's no longer a conspiracy. It's something that we all understand. These governments are making businesses with the Ayatollahs, with occupations, Islamic occupations throughout the entire Middle East. The Middle East is full of countries that are super rich, not just in like resources and everything, but in oil and so on. So what better way to exploit these areas like they're exploiting Africa than to oppress the indigenous peoples, from the Egyptian Copts to the Lebanese Phoenicians to the like everybody, in that region, and exploit their resources and sell it for cheap back to the Western countries. So when I'm speaking about that, again, I'm not talking about Western countries as its people, the German people, the American people, the Europeans, the Australians, Canadians stood with us as we were fighting these governments. But we have to understand one truth, that there are brokers in these governments that make deals. And when you're in business, you're a business broker, you always make a percentage of every deal that is being done. These deals, when they involve billions or now trillions coming from Qatar and the Islamic regime, even 1% of the trillion means billions. What can you do with these billions? You can influence institutions, you can buy think tanks, you can buy campaigns for politicians, islands for them, whatever you want. This is the real power that is going on. So when you have a dissident like my father that is putting its finger not just on the Ayatollahs and the Islamists that have taken over our countries, but also on their complicit brokers in the West, both sides are interested of not having him recovered and having him dead, and with him that truth. Thankfully, again, we have the internet right now and people are picking up on that. We showed these networks in 2023 when the Biden administration was making and brokering a deal with the Ayatollahs, giving them $6 billion, Michael. That's $1.2 billion per hostage head and bringing hostages back, but not my father, leaving him behind and telling us to our face, your father's not coming out. At the same time, Iran International and Semaphore exposed what they called the Iran Experts Initiative, which was a network of Islamists infiltrating our government, our State Department. They're still working in our Pentagon today. They worked they were connected to the US envoy of Iran, and showing that these decisions that are not made by Americans, they're made by our enemies that have infiltrated us. So that might be a little bit too much right now to understand this, or not.
No,
I
no,
don't know how.
it's okay.
Yeah.
I actually have follow-up questions for that. So, because you did mention yesterday, we're talking. You mentioned because you saw my interview with Goldie, and you said these governments are not being fooled, implying that they know exactly what they're getting into and what they're doing. And since you did bring up think tanks, the first thing that occurred to me was a group like NIAC, NIAC. What's a group like that's role in something like this? Because I've heard some pretty suspicious stuff about NIAC. Could you explain a little bit more if that's okay?
I can't explain too much because they go after people with millions of dollars and lawsuits. So we
Okay,
have to
okay,
be
okay, yeah,
very,
okay,
very
okay, okay,
careful
yeah. All right,
what we do. But let me
all
give
right.
you the facts that are out there,
Only,
okay?
only,
These
only what you feel comfortable with.
only what is out there right
Th
now.
that was not a planned question. It just came to,
I
yeah,
know.
yeah.
And that shows your curiosity for the truth, and that is so important because journalists right now are out there going against, going to investigate exactly what is going on and why is our government making wrong decisions? Why do we have an administration like our current administration that stood against terrorism and invite people like the Al Qaeda leader Al Shara, he's called Al Shara now, into the White House, saluting him on Veterans Day, like something that is like unimaginable for Americans to understand, can be understood when we understand these lobby groups. These lobby groups are out there to outsmart our politicians, to tell them you can not change jihadism. Jihadism is something that is cultural in the Middle East. They like it over there. They survive over there. But what you can do is you can control them with deals. And that is the underestimation that has been going on since the time of Carter, since the time of like when they made the first deals with the Ayatollahs and pretty much kicked out our government, the Iranian government of the Shah at that time, and installed the Ayatollah regime inside of Iran and many more regimes throughout the Middle East. So when you're exposing their narrative, that is, yeah, of course we know they're bad. Of course we know they're not good and against human rights, and oh, we were very concerned. But your only chance is either military war against them, boots on the ground, and who wants that? Or making a deal with them. That is the power of narrative. That is the power that they then bring into our media, into the academia. That is what they teach our students in school. MESA, an institution, for example, that dictates what is in our textbooks in all of America, what is being taught in political science classes, what is being taught in history classes. They have brainwashed a generation to accept exactly that truth, to have a completely bizarre understanding of the Middle East, and to buy into this narrative that is anti-American, that surrenders, and that pretty much brings in the enemy to crumble our governments from within.
You know, I've said this before. Our enemies are so patient. Our enemies are so patient and they're able to wait so long. And I think part of our weakness in the West is that we sort of lost sight of the long game. We've become a society that is very much attracted to quick fixes and sort of that instant gratification. And I think that's a weakness that our enemies really know how to exploit. We just want to buy calm, you know? Like, that's
Yeah.
my biggest criticism of, you know, the leaders of the enlightened West is that they seem far less interested in actually fixing the problem. They've always just wanted to put a band-aid on it. And it's you see it from the plight of women in Afghanistan to kids being raised by literal Hamas in Gaza and to the plight of the Iranian people. It seems like everybody's searching for a quick fix. Nobody really wants to solve the problem. So my question to you is, aside from not giving terrorist regimes like the IRGC billions and enabling them, what things could the international community do proactively to actually stand with the Iranian people, to actually stand with the people of Afghanistan and bring about real change that would see the Iranian people living the lives that they deserve to live, lives full of freedom, liberty, and self-determination?
You hit the nerve of it actually by saying not just the money. The money is the number one thing that we have to understand. You know, we think sometimes that, and there's an analogy that the Islamic regime is the head of the snake, and when we cut the head of the snake, the whole system of Islamist crumbles. I get that, but the head of the snake is kind of a bad analogy because Islamism and jihadism is like a tumor, and a tumor is spread out. So when you take out the head of the snake, when you take out the heads of Hamas, when you take out the heads of Hezbollah, it gives them a punch, which is an awesome punch, but their leadership is replaceable. When it is a tumor, it's irreplaceable. It's all over the place. So you take out General Salami, they bring in General Bologna. You take out like Al Shara, they bring in like Al whatever. Human beings doesn't matter to them. They have enough of them to replace and be the next leader, because the next leader makes billions. So taking out Khamenei even would be a big blow, of course, but it would be a symbolic blow. And then the structure that is there is not taken out. So if you think of these Islamists as the cells of cancer that have spread throughout the body. Cancer can only survive if it has a blood supply. What is the blood supply? It is money. If you cut out the money to these Islamists, to these jihadists, to these regimes, you dry them out, you weaken them so far that the people can take over and take them out. But we are blinded by that. We are told to focus. For example, in America, we had this campaign of like, what was his name? That little baby jihadist, pro-Hamas person that was going to campuses, Khalili, something Khalili.
Mahmoud Khalil.
Mahmoud Khalil, okay, like a baby jihadist who goes to campuses and blabbers. There was a whole thing of the entire Jewish diaspora, Iranian diaspora, every diaspora that's against jihadists, to take him out and what we have to do with him and export him and deport him and blah, 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 and this and that. And he had these lawyers coming up. So for a whole news
Yeah.
cycle of months, we were following that. Very interesting. Yeah. What was happening at the same time? Our administration was in Syria, in Saudi Arabia, in the Middle East, going from place to place and making billions and trillion-dollar deals. That was sold to us as a great business. You and I know you cannot make business with people who want to kill you, right? Because they're using that money. They're using that influence to take us out. As you said, they're always looking at the long game. So while we were all talking about, this Khalili guy and blah, 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 our administration pretty much a deal that was 150 billion with these ayatollahs.
Yeah.
So saying right now that we made $1 trillion deal, what kind of future do we have? We're not paying attention to the money. So what I would advise every smart person out there, one, what you said, we need to explain the truth. We need to dig deeper into the real reality of what is going on. Who are the indigenous people? Who are the real occupiers? We have a war on the narrative. Number two, anytime money is involved, every one of you guys out there has to be double and triple loud. Any cent spent by these terrorists, any cent spent back is our future demise, is our future takedown.
Yeah, it's in a lot of ways it's not really the blind spot of the West actually. It's actually the sort of the duplicitous nature of the West. It's that, business comes before human rights. And it's sad to say that as an American, because you want to think, well, land of the free, but we're sort of willing to give that ideal a backseat if it means we can make money before acting on that ideal. Um, the IRGC, they're not alone. They have strong allies in China and Russia. Do you feel like these countries keep the regime propped up for as long as they can so they can also benefit from it? Because it's hard to imagine a world where Russia and China would be okay with the fall of the IRGC. I mean, I know at least for Russia, the IRGC is a source of drones and potential, resources for them to sustain their war against, potential other Eastern European states. They're in Ukraine right now, but who knows? Maybe they go after another Eastern European country. What is the role of China and Russia in all this?
To make it very simple and to understand their allyship, it's more of an opportunistic allyship.
Hmm.
As we said, everybody profits from jihadists that exploit the region. That's just money being made. But when you look at the ideology of China is, communist, atheist, and these are jihadist Islamists. This is more actually enemies right there. Same with Russia, which is more like Christian and Orthodox and whatnot. Again, they don't have a same root. They don't have an ideological compliance between them. So if the regime crumbles and they can still make money with other places, they will choose that China will not send an army or something when the IRGC is crumbling, when the Ayatollahs are crumbling. Putin will not,
Right.
do anything that will harm it. And we've seen this, we've seen how the IRGC has been taken out of Syria, unfortunately replaced by other jihadists,
Right.
but you didn't see Putin jumping in there, Chinese jumping in there, nothing happened. So we have proof to show that they will not back a crumbling regime. Who is backing the crumbling regime is the money cartel. And that is a real big source, because as long as they're making money, they will not want a change. Anytime you have a change in system, these brokers that are making money have to now go out and find new connections and make new deals with the next government. And that is something that is destabilizing to them and a big inconvenience. So what our job is to show that this regime is already crumbling. This regime is unstable for your business that you're making. So, in other words, if there's anybody in American politics or in European politics who thinks they can make another JCPOA, another negotiation with the Ayatollahs, and they think that this is a great business model, let me tell you that a couple months ago, the entire fleet of big rigs, like the big transporters in Iran, were on strike. That means nobody was moving in there anymore. If you think you can make a deal with the Ayatollahs on the blood of the Iranian people and then sell your merchandise there and have business with the Ayatollahs, the Iranian people will stop that. They're no longer in this business. They're the ones who have the power to completely take out the economy. If there's no economy, you can't make money here, you can't make profits here. So this is a bad business decision for anybody who wants to continue that.
Well, it's come a lot in recent news that Iran is really suffering from a water shortage. I mean, the mismanagement, the corruption, the Karaj Dam is under so much stress. It is, I mean, if there is potentially, a death spot for the regime, this could be it because they're telling up to 30% of their population that they might have to evacuate. But where will they go? Where will they go? And they're trying to build a new capital city somewhere in the south. I mean, I feel like above any other moment, this is really, I mean, we could really see the end of the regime in the not distant future. Would you agree that in a lot of ways the regime through its mismanagement and corruption has sort of been the cause of its own demise?
No, because it's not mismanagement. That's
Mm,
that's another misconception.
okay.
If they're not dumb, they're extremely smart. The leadership, not the IRGC agent that kills somebody in the street, but the leadership of jihadism is not idiots. They're extremely smart and calculated. They are not mismanaging because they're not a government that wants to govern Iran. They're an occupation that wants to destroy Iran. So let's go back 1,400 years. These Ayatollahs are not Iranians. They are descendants of the first Islamists that invaded the entire Middle East. So they have different branches all over the Middle East and occupied nation after nation of indigenous peoples and suppressed them to wipe them out, take their resources again, and use that for their own enrichment. And the end goal is the global caliphate. Okay. Of course, they split into two. We have the Sunnis versus the Shia, and they both want to be on top. But meanwhile, they're working together while also being competition. So forget about thinking of the Ayatollahs as a government that wants Iran to blossom. They came to Iran when Ayatollah Khomeini landed in Iran on a Air France flight, by the way, brought in by French and German journalists, and was flown into Tehran. One of the first speeches that he had was, "I will let Iran burn to light the flame of Islamism all over the world." Does that sound to you like a government of Iran? Does that sound to you like somebody who wants to make Iran prosper and the people prosper? He vowed to destroy Iran. Imagine like Khalili or whatever his name was again coming to America, taking over our Oval Office, and then vowing to destroy America to light the flame of Islamism. Would you think, oh, this is a government of America that is somehow mismanaging their goals? No, These are mortal enemies who came to destroy us. So one of the ways to destroy us is to cause catastrophe after catastrophe, buildings falling down, water crisis, this, that. So the people cannot mobilize and take them down as they're doing right now. They have to run for a piece of bread. They have to make sure that they have the water to drink. They have to run and be occupied by all of this kind of shit that the Ayatollahs are producing to keep them busy, to keep them oppressed, to think that if I somehow get a piece of bread and a drop of water, I'm fine. I can survive this. This is
Hmm.
calculated and
Okay.
part of their war on the people.
That was excellently explained. Um, wow. Shifting back focus to your father, um, there was one other group of people, and it is a group of people who have, a lot of fondness for Iranians. We're talking about Israelis. The Israelis went through their own hostage crisis between them and Hamas, and Israeli hostages were being held kilometers away from them in Gaza. You highlighted the difference in the way um, people were mobilized internationally in support of the Israeli hostages. You said that you didn't find the same for people like, your father and others in those same situations. Can you explain that more?
Yeah, let me explain that. But I'm saying that the struggle of the Israelis and the Iranians and the Copts and the Phoenicians and everybody that we have, the indigenous people of the Middle East, is all the same because we've been allies from ancient times. And we understand that we come from cultures and civilizations that carry truth, that carry, standing up for what is right, and light versus their darkness and their propaganda and their lies, on the other side. So it is the same struggle. But what happened on October 7th was a wake-up call because it shook a nation that thought they are kind of safe inside of Israel, there were Israeli hostages held by Hamas before,
Right.
and they were rotting there alone. There were Iranian hostages held by the IRGC before, as my father was in 2020, before October 7 happened, but they were rotting there. The international community was not paying attention. The massacre that happened on October 7th and hundreds of hostages being taken at the same time gave the whole point of view of that jihadists come into your country and take people, kidnap people and murder them and butcher them. And that's what they have done for decades, made it global. So as horrific as that is, it is moments like 9/11, it is moments like October 7 that wake up the world to something that was already there, but because it was divided, because families were alone and families didn't have governments behind them that would do what Israel did, fight a war to bring their hostages back. That's why it was not common knowledge. The Islamic regime, when they came into power in 1979, they took the entire US embassy hostage. And back then it was 24 hours on TV showing the hostages that were held inside of Iran. And for 444 days, the whole nation was looking at that. What happened after that is they didn't stop taking hostages, but they stopped putting it on TV. They stopped talking about it. And when you were taken hostage, when you were kidnapped, and we were assassinated, the families were told, shh, shut up, don't talk about it, don't use the H word, don't go into TV, don't speak about it. Why? Again, because our governments have brokers and lobby groups that want to continue making business deals with our kidnappers. And that would be kind of a bad story on TV to say, 20 Americans are right now being butchered inside of Iran, but we made a great business deal with them and we're getting like so and so many like turbans or this and that from them. It doesn't sell. So in order to sell us that it's a great idea to make business with jihadists, they had to fade out what is actually jihad, what is happening to people, what is happening at the border of Israel, what is happening at the borders of Middle Eastern countries, what is happening in Europe, in America. I can't travel to Europe, Michael, without having 24-hour protection. And it's just me. Imagine other people were speaking up. Nobody is safe.
Why do you think so many people get the Middle East wrong? I mean, You and I both know that these are not people that we can negotiate with. We know that these aren't people who act in good faith. I mean, I guess, well, maybe you sort of answered the question because you said that there's business behind these deals, and when you can make a dollar, it's in your best interest to negotiate. But it just seems so crazy to live in this day and age where you have people who say, we have a theology, and in that theology, our version of our theology, we have to cause as much chaos around the world. How has the West been able to balance these two things? Because the West knows that this is who they are. I can't imagine that they don't know.
Mhm.
But they still like it's the balance of financial interests yet knowing what the other side is. It throws me through a loop, honestly.
Um, okay, several things that you spoke about, and
Yeah.
this is very interesting. Um, One is how did they manage to influence so many people globally to believe lies about the Middle East while the jihadists are showing us, right? Like they were filming October 7th, they were filming how they kidnapped my father and everything, who they are. That is the battlefield, and it's one of the most important battlefields is the war of ideas and the war of, the court of public opinion or whatever we say. When you control media, you control public opinion and you control how they think. So if I show you only footage of children in Gaza being dead, being unalive, being like, like whatever, it was devastating. It's war. Of course, it's devastating. And Hamas puts them in harm's way for a reason. And then tell you the reason that this child in Gaza is being blown into pieces is because of the bad Israelis who are the main occupiers and who are the main influencers and blah 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 blah. And you look at Israel, it's like tiny. I mean, they're mighty, but they're in size small, right? Like compared to all of the Arab Islamist occupied areas over there. When you tell that over and over and over and over again in the media, you are influencing and brainwashing the minds of our young generation. Now you start bringing influencers into TikTok, into social media, and so on. They're not starting from scratch. They didn't start on October 7th, 2023. They started during the Cold War, when, and this is a part of history, the Soviet Union collapsed. The tactics of the Soviet Union, tactics of the communists, and all of these like ex-communists that were still there, fused together with a new emerging Islamist core. And that marriage of communism and Islamism is what made it so strong. They used communist and KGB tactics to bring that brainwashing into the people, to infiltrate groups. And one place where they did that was in our schools. So when I was brought up in Europe and in America, and I went to political science or history lessons, they taught me about my history, about the moments the Ayatollahs hijacked my country. It was a revolution. People came to the streets and just saw something in Khomeini and brought him in. And we were like going nuts. We were like, no, that's not what happened. They were killing people on the streets. It was a war. This was this and that. Brainwashing us for decades, is what brings this generation and makes this generation gullible to what they see now on the news. You and me have now the special task of going there and not saying you fucking idiot, like what do they call this? Like, useful idiots and blah 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 blah, but understanding these are our children that have been hijacked by our enemies and brainwashed to being soldiers of them. And we have to be very gentle but direct with them and bringing them back to the truth. And that takes an army of us being out there every single day and explaining the truth to them and explaining to our Middle Eastern people what is happening to them.
If your father were here today, I know that he'd be really proud of you because you didn't shy away from the fight. You picked up where he was taken, and you're still taking the fight to the IRGC. If your father were here today, what do you think he would say to Western leaders, to other people held hostage by the IRGC, and honestly to a world that just didn't respond fast enough or responsibly enough?
He would remind them of where we're all coming from. Like the Western civilizations are civilizations that came from the Middle East. The Middle East is the birthplace of civilizations, from the Egyptians to the Persians, everything that we had, our empires and everything. That was the world. And that's where human rights are coming from. That's where freedom and all of these concepts are coming from. So we're not the past. We're not backwards over there. We are actually the future. If you don't want this to be your future, you have to go back to your roots. You have to go back to understanding there are armies of indigenous peoples all over the Middle East doing the hard work, going right now as these soldiers and colonels are doing in Iran on the streets, looking the ayatollahs and the enemies in the eyes, even though they know what's going to happen to them. They have the fire to do that, because this is not about countries. This is not about right now. This is a war, the biggest war that we have in history. And if you want to be on the right side of history, and it sounds so abused because we say it over and over again, but this is the right side of history, then you have to side with the people that are fighting the right war. We will not forget. History will not forget who sided with which side. So come, support us, be with us, and stop supporting the wrong side, because whether it's now or in 9 months or in 9 years, we will win. We are stronger. Truth will win. And we will remember who stood with us. And that's going to be very, very harsh for you to wake up to. I don't want to be the last think tank or the last politician or the last business that still thought it's great to do business with people's hands who were bloodied by war, whether it's in Syria, where they're butchering the Druze, the Alawites, the Christians, the Kurds, or it's in Lebanon, where they're butchering the Phoenicians, whether it's the Amazigh, whether it's the Sudanese, whether it's Nigeria, whether it's Afghanistan. This war is now all of our wars. So we're rising, we're coming together, and you better join us before it's too late.
I think we're approaching that time faster than people think. I think I think people are in for a very rude awakening when they realize that they've been on not just the wrong side of history, but the murderous side of history. The side of history that, only despots, dictators, and murderous regimes are on. And these, eventually, all these people wind up in the dustbin of history, just like it happened with the USSR, just like it happened with Saddam Hussein. Yeah, I think we're a lot closer to that moment than people realize. So,
I agree.
Gazelle, I cannot thank you enough for coming on and sharing your story here. I don't know, I can't even imagine how painful it is to wake up with this in your heart every day. But when I hear you speak, I can see how big your heart is. And I can tell that this isn't just about you, your father, your family's experience, the Iranian experience. I can tell that for you, this is so much bigger than that. That your dad stood for so much more than just, the suffering of Iranians. Thank you so much. Really, you've been an incredible, incredible guest, and I'm really honored that I got to have you on for Iran Week. And you're somebody who I hope to bring back on many more times.
Definitely. The honor is mine. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing. And please continue. We need people like you out there. And shout out to the Egyptian cops. We're with you. We're fighting with you.
Thank you so much. قربانت. خیلی ممنون.
سپاس گذارم.
Guys, that has been our final episode for Iran Week. Thank you for tuning in. Please, please check out Gazelle and check out what she's doing. She is such a warrior for truth and human rights. You really can't find anybody better. Once more, thank you, Gazelle.
Thank you.